The day a boardroom decision redefined competition. It began with a meeting no one expected to matter, a routine quarterly review scheduled without urgency, attended by executives who believed the future would look exactly like the past. Yet inside that unremarkable room, a single decision set off a chain reaction that would ripple through the entire industry and permanently alter the rules of competition. To understand why this moment stands as a turning point, we need to return to a time when the company seemed locked into predictable patterns. Competitors moved in parallel. Strategies mirrored one another. Innovation came in careful, incremental steps, designed not to disrupt, but to maintain balance. Everyone played by the same rules. Everyone avoided risks that threatened stability. The market had settled into a quiet equilibrium. Our story begins with a presentation buried midway through the agenda, an analysis prepared by a strategic planner few people in the room had ever spoken to. The planner wasn't senior. They weren't famous internally. Yet they carried a perspective no one else had, a belief that the industry's old assumptions were quietly expiring. Their report revealed a pattern leadership had failed to see. Consumer expectations were shifting. Smaller competitors were experimenting in ways the giants weren't. Technologies once considered too early were maturing faster than forecasts predicted. And beneath the surface, the next phase of competition was forming, not through scale, but through speed, responsiveness, and proximity to the customer. When the planner finished presenting, the room remained silent. Some executives exchanged skeptical glances. Others skimmed the data as if searching for a familiar narrative that wasn't there. The proposal that followed challenged the company's deepest habits: shift investment away from the legacy strategy, reorganize teams around rapid experimentation, and commit to a bold new direction that prioritized adaptability over tradition. At first, the suggestion felt impossible. It contradicted nearly every principle leadership had relied on for years. But then came the moment that cracked the certainty in the room. One executive, previously quiet, admitted they had been seeing signs of stagnation too. Declining margins in previously stable sectors, rising customer complaints, subtle but undeniable losses in loyalty. The admission pierced the facade of confidence, and for the first time in years, the boardroom confronted a possibility it had avoided. Maintaining the status quo was now the biggest risk of all. What no one realized at that moment was that this conversation, this one unexpected challenge to the old blueprint, would set the company on a path that redefined the competitive landscape for everyone. The planner's proposal lingered in the air long after the slides disappeared from the screen. Executives who had entered the meeting expecting routine updates now found themselves confronting uncomfortable truths. The industry they believed was stable had been quietly reshaping itself, and the company, once a benchmark for excellence, had fallen into a rhythm of complacency. Yet admitting that meant questioning decisions, structures, and priorities they had defended for years. As discussion resumed, the room split along familiar lines. Some executives argued for caution, insisting the company's size and reputation would protect it from disruptive newcomers. They pointed to decades of dominance, long-term contracts, and economies of scale as proof that the market still respected the old rules. Others, stirred by the planner's analysis, sensed the foundation shifting. They spoke of customer dissatisfaction creeping upward, of internal processes slowing innovation, of competitors experimenting in ways that hinted at a new frontier. The planner watched silently as the debate intensified. Their work had exposed a truth, but truth alone rarely moves a corporation. Resistance emerged quickly. One executive dismissed the findings as scenario planning gone too far. Another argued the company didn't need reinvention, just refinement. A third suggested that any significant pivot would unsettle investors and risk short-term volatility. Familiar fears wrap themselves in familiar language. But data has a way of altering certainty. Chart by chart, trend by trend, the planner clarified the message. Customers weren't simply switching providers, they were switching expectations. Markets weren't slowing, they were fragmenting. Competitors weren't failing, they were evolving under the radar. The patterns pointed to a future where the company's traditional advantages would become irrelevant unless it adapted. Tension deepened when the CFO, long known for defending conservative strategies, leaned forward and asked for projections under two scenarios. One where the company maintained the current path, and one where it embraced the planner's proposed shift. The room fell silent. The comparison was stark. Under the legacy model, growth plateaued within 3 years. Under the adaptive model, volatility increased, but so did long-term potential. That single contrast rewired the tone of the conversation. Still, not everyone was convinced. A senior executive argued that the company's brand strength would shield it from most disruptions. They insisted customers valued stability above innovation. But before the argument gained momentum, a younger director countered with a pointed observation. Stability is not what customers seek. Relevance is. The comment cut through the room more sharply than anyone expected. As the meeting stretched on, pressure mounted. The planner realized the company stood at a crossroads. If leadership rejected the proposal, the industry would move forward without them. If they embraced it, they would be stepping into uncertainty, but with intention instead of fear. The debate reached its peak when the COO finally broke their silence. They acknowledged that internal processes had grown rigid, that innovation was slowing, and that the planner's work reflected realities their teams had been quietly reporting for months. Then came a sentence that changed the entire trajectory of the meeting. If we don't redefine how we compete, someone else will do it for us. In that instant, the room shifted. Leadership sensed the decision ahead wasn't merely strategic, it was existential. The rules of competition were already changing. The only question now was whether the company would change with them. And the next vote would determine everything. The vote didn't come immediately. Instead, the room descended into a level of scrutiny rarely seen in its walls. Executives demanded deeper dives into the planner's data, questioning not just trends, but the assumptions buried beneath them. They pushed for clarifications, challenged projections, and tested every scenario as if hoping to find a flaw that would justify staying the course. But each question only reinforced what the planner already knew. The industry's quiet evolution was accelerating, and the company's current trajectory was built on a foundation that could no longer support it. Outside the boardroom, the signs of strain were becoming more visible. Product teams complained of slowed development cycles. Sales reported unusual patterns, clients asking for features the company wasn't equipped to build, or comparing the company's offerings to upstart competitors previously considered irrelevant. Support teams flagged rising dissatisfaction among long-standing customers. These cracks hadn't yet reached the executive dashboards, but they were spreading fast enough that no one directly interacting with customers could ignore them. Inside the meeting, the conflict sharpened. A group of veteran executives argued fiercely against the proposed shift. They claimed the company's scale and global reputation gave it an unshakable advantage. They insisted the planner's analysis overstated the threat of smaller competitors. They pointed out how many times the company had faced predictions of disruption only to emerge stronger. To them, the idea of a strategic overhaul felt not bold, but reckless, an unnecessary risk introduced by someone too new to understand the company's legacy. But for every argument defending the past, the planner offered evidence of the future. They presented real cases of companies that clung to outdated assumptions until it was too late. They showed how subtle shifts in customer expectations had triggered massive industry transformations in the past. They highlighted how emerging technologies, once considered fringe, were already becoming standards elsewhere. And with each example, the planner drew a quiet parallel to the company's current path. The tension reached a breaking point when the head of product, long frustrated by slow internal cycles, spoke up. They acknowledged that innovation had stalled, not because teams lacked ideas, but because the company's structures punished experimentation. They admitted that competitors, smaller, faster, unburdened by tradition, were implementing features in months that took the company over a year. Their voice carried the fatigue of someone who had fought too many internal battles just to stand still. Silence followed, heavy, uncomfortable, necessary. Then the planner revealed one final piece of analysis, something they had hesitated to share earlier. A projection showing that within 5 years, if the company maintained its current strategy, it would still appear profitable, but would lose its position as an industry leader. Margins would shrink, market share would erode, competitors would encircle the segments the company considered safe. It wasn't a collapse. It was something quieter and more dangerous: irrelevance. The impact of that projection rippled through the room. No executive wanted to be remembered as the one who oversaw the company's slow fade into the background. The fear of disruption was powerful, but the fear of becoming invisible was stronger. The meeting paused as leadership processed the implications. Some stared at the table. Others leaned back, absorbing the weight of the decision. The planner knew the balance was shifting. Years of certainty were being replaced by a realization that the company's greatest risk wasn't change, it was refusing to change. Slowly, the tone of the conversation transformed. Executives who had been skeptical began asking how the shift could be managed, not whether it should. Questions turned from doubt to possibility. And for the first time since the meeting began, leadership wasn't debuting the planner's analysis, they were building on it. By the time the discussion ended, one truth had become undeniable. The decision ahead wouldn't merely influence the company's next quarter, it would shape the next decade of competition. All that remained was the final vote, a choice that would determine whether the company stepped into the uncertainty of reinvention or retreated into the familiar comfort of decline. The boardroom felt unnaturally still as the final session began. No one spoke at first. The planner sat near the edge of the table, watching leaders who had once radiated certainty now sift through the implications of the past days. They each understood what the vote represented. It was more than a strategic choice. It was a judgment on the company's identity, on whether it would cling to a legacy that no longer fit the world or build a new one while there was still time. The CEO opened the meeting with a stark reminder. The market was shifting with or without them. Competitors once dismissed as minor threats were quietly capturing territory. Customers were drifting toward providers who moved faster and listened closer. And while the company still appeared strong externally, the cracks revealed by the planner showed a trajectory that ended not in collapse, but in gradual irrelevance. That fate, the CEO said, would be harder to recover from than any temporary volatility caused by reinvention. The tension in the room tightened as executives prepared their final positions. The veterans who once defended the old model softened their tone. Some admitted their reliance on historical success had narrowed their perspective. Others confessed they had seen early signs of stagnation, but lacked the evidence to challenge entrenched assumptions. For the first time, the weight of protecting the status quo felt heavier than the risk of change. Yet doubt lingered. A few worried the shift would unsettle investors. Others feared the complexity of reorganizing teams accustomed to linear, predictable processes. But those concerns, once dominant, now felt small compared to the reality laid bare by the planner's analysis. The rules of competition had already changed. They could adjust now or be forced to adjust later, under far worse conditions. The planner was asked to speak one final time. They didn't repeat charts or projections. Instead, They described what they had learned from months of studying the market. Industries rarely fall to dramatic disruptions. They fade when leaders confuse stability with safety. They decline when they mistake momentum for relevance. They weaken when they stop questioning the assumptions that built their success. And by the time they realize the shift, it's too late. The room absorbed the message. Slowly, heads nodded, not in agreement with the planner alone, but in recognition of a truth they had collectively resisted. The vote began. One by one, executives cast their decision. Voices that once defended the legacy strategy now supported the transition. Others, though hesitant, chose the uncertain path forward. Only a few remained opposed, but their resistance no longer held the power to shape the outcome. When the final tally was read, the result was unmistakable. The company would pivot. It would reorganize around adaptability. It would invest in faster development cycles. It would empower teams to experiment rather than preserve outdated routines. It would compete not with sheer size, but with responsiveness, clarity, and a renewed focus on the customer. The decision marked the end of one era and the birth of another. In the weeks that followed, the shift became visible. Roadmaps were rewritten. Legacy projects were retired. Cross-functional teams formed to accelerate innovation. Departments once isolated began collaborating. The energy inside the company changed, not with celebration, but with purpose. Employees felt something they hadn't felt in years: movement. And beyond the company's walls, competitors felt it too. The quiet equilibrium that had defined the industry was broken. A new race had begun, not for dominance, but for relevance. The boardroom decision that seemed small at first had redefined the very nature of competition. Looking back, leaders would realize the turning point wasn't the vote itself, but the moment they finally acknowledged the world had moved on, and they were ready to move with it.